Someone recently asked me my thoughts on aliens, which inspired me to share those thoughts with all of you. This will be strictly my opinion and much more off the cuff than my typical video, although I did do my lovely listeners the courtesy of organizing my thoughts into a script, so I'm not rambling for 10 or 15 minutes and going on a bunch of tangents. This is my 100 sub special. Thanks so much for subscribing and supporting my little channel. I very much appreciate it. So there's a lot of noise now around the topic of aliens with all of the congressional hearings. Those, along with proliferation of drones for commercial, personal, and military use, have contributed to a bump of sightings of odd things in the sky. Add to that an age of paranoia, AI, and conspiracies both real and imagined run rampant. It's no wonder there's an increased interest in the topic of aliens and UFOs, or UAP as they're known now. It's such a big topic, it's hard to pick a spot to start. But let's put it very bluntly that there's no detection of extraterrestrial life that is widely accepted by the scientific community. There are hints, there are suggestions, and there are some tantalizing tidbits that come very close but do not quite meet the high standards of scientific scrutiny. After all, when you're about to announce what could be the biggest discovery in the history of humanity, you want to make sure that you got it right. Hello, everyone. Giant Stone Head here. You enjoy obscure science, forgotten history. You can support the channel by dropping a like, clicking subscribe, or sharing the video. I truly appreciate it. And now, with YouTube things out of the way, let's continue our discussion about aliens. Let's begin then with what to me is the most obvious place to start, the most basic forms of life, the microbes. There have been some tantalizing near misses when it comes to the discovery of microbial life elsewhere other than Earth. Perhaps the biggest and most well known incident was the Mars meteorites, where what was thought to be bacterial fossils were discovered, and it led the Clinton administration to announce the discovery of extraterrestrial life, which was quickly walked back when the scientific community couldn't come to a consensus on the matter. Then there's the Viking experiments, which showed possible metabolism occurring in Martian soil. However, abiotic, which is to say chemical processes not requiring life, means could not be ruled out. Mars has always been a focus of the human imagination when it comes to the hunt for extraterrestrial life. An early Italian astronomer thought he saw canals on the surface of the planet and imagined a race of Martians trying to eke out a living on their cold, red world. Little green men have yet to be found. The idea of Martians living deep under the ground of our neighboring planet has never quite gone away. There's a few hints of possible microbial life on the cold, rusty world, though, with seasonal methane clouds not currently explainable by chemical means being feature observed fairly regularly. And the planet was to believe to have, at one point, to have been covered by an ocean, which the water of which now being locked on icy poles and subsurface deposits. Possible some form of microbial life may have survived and live deep under the crust of the planet, sheltered from UV radiation and harsh conditions of the surface, and using the water locked under there for its metabolism. However, the truth of that has yet to be seen. Venus is also a potential candidate for extraterrestrial life in our solar system. The planet's surface is a desert hellscape with pressures akin to the deep ocean, temperatures hot enough to melt lead, and high winds. It is possibly resurfaced every so many million years by volcanic eruptions. So any form of life as we know it on Earth is not likely to survive in those conditions. We could speculate about exotic forms of life, but at that point we're kind of making things up, and it's no more than an interesting exercise. Something I have a bit of a beef with, because what can be a thought experiment can be shared uncritically as if it is factual, which in the current information environment is irresponsible. It's not doing the thought experiments that bother me. It's simply a matter of how it's done and without the important caveat that it's just speculation. Anyways, Venus' surface doesn't seem to be all that promising for life as we know it. But there's a layer in the thick atmosphere with similar temperatures and pressures to Earth's surface. The interesting thing about this is that there are odd shadows and chemical reactions taking place that do not seem to have an abiotic explanation. Therefore, it's possible that some sort of microbial life living in this particular layer of the atmosphere is responsible. Perhaps a remnant of life that began on the surface, who was lofted into the atmosphere and thrived there while the surface went to hell. Speculative, but the idea is intriguing enough that there are missions in the works, some by the Japanese, space agency and some by private space agencies to go and sample the atmospheric layer in question and see what, if anything, might be living there. Question, therefore, remains open. Another promising area to look for life is what are known as ice shell moons. These are moons like Enceladus that are believed to have subsurface oceans that are heated by radioactive decay. We can see that these oceans exist because of eruptions of cryogenic volcanoes. The sprays from these volcanoes can be analyzed and show some of the building blocks for life. Very possible that the conditions within the ice shell are, at some layers, amenable to Earth style life. Perhaps there are something like volcanic vents, which are found in our own oceans, and where it's speculated life here may have begun. There are plans to eventually figure out a way to get under the ice shell and send a submersible probe down there to see what might be lurking. Once again, the question remains open. So the presence of microbial life in our own solar system is at best a question mark. The presence of life in the wider galaxy or universe are equally questionable. There have long been standing projects such as SETI who monitor the cosmos for potential signals from alien civilizations. There are the occasional raft of headlines that tease the discovery of a Dyson swarm or sphere around a star, those being a type of hypothetical structure built around a star to harvest its energy, or of an Earth like planet found in the promising Goldilocks zone around a star, which is the zone where water can be a liquid on the surface. Between when this script was written and now sitting to record it, another such discovery hit the headlines. This one seemingly confirming an Earth like planet with an atmosphere in the Goldilocks zone of a red dwarf. However, the idea of a Dyson swarm is largely hypothetical, and while not impossible, there's not really been any evidence that any of the supposed sightings around uh, exoplanet or around any other stars are artificial in nature. Most of them can be explained by some sort of natural means. And there's no evidence that any of these Earth like planets being inhabited. And there's no way right now to really tell in any case. Although, when techniques get sensitive enough, there's a thought to look for artificial molecules with no known natural mechanism for production, such as CFCs and the atmosphere of distant worlds. That would be a promising avenue of research to look for in an alien intelligence. But so far, no definitive radio signals, structures, or any other potential means of communications have been found. But what about potential extraterrestrials closer to home? The congressional hearings on UAP in the last 5 years or so have brought up some interesting and wild allegations. I've been following them loosely since they started, mostly out of curiosity. It's something to see that there are actual on the record public hearings about UFOs, aliens, and cover ups. The gist of modern allegations from David Grush et al. Are that the United States government, along with Russia and China, have had contact with non human intelligences, NHI, and have their technology and biologics. There have been reverse engineering programs for decades that are held in a sort of black box of various organizations within and outside the government, including Lockheed Martin, among others. More or less, the Cold War era skunkworks projects, that led to things such as the U 2 spy plane, were the more surface level of this shadowy program. There have been a lot of video and image dumps associated with these hearings, of various levels of believability. There were credible testimonies from Air Force and Navy pilots who discussed seeing metallic spheres who could move impossibly fast with no obvious means of propulsion. And there were discussions of spheres within cubes as well as with similar movement patterns, also from pilots and other credible military members. A good chunk of this testimony was apparently backed by instrumentation such as radar. Various other things were discussed, and this is far from an extensive review of the hearings, and most of it is just also my own recollection. But to the point of the matter, while the hearings were not nothing, they are witness testimony under oath after all to the public, and they are now a matter of public record. They seem to be hampered by matters of security clearance and national security. Most of it comes across as hearsay, and there are mentions of interviews in a skiff which are not public. This, in combination with a somewhat mixed bag of footage and photographs, some of which are pretty silly, as you can see on the screen, which I guess is a mock up of what someone reportedly saw. It makes the entire thing come across as much ado about nothing. Those involved are always teasing big things, and then when the next hearing is announced, and then it comes around and it's more of the same. Now, I wouldn't expect them to trot out an alien on national TV, of which there are apparently 9 species. Yes, that is part of the testimony. But give us something else, a piece of metal of unknown origin that can be examined by civilian scientists. An example of schematics or reports that correspond to well known technologies so as not to damage national security that show in some way how the NHI technology led to it. Perhaps indisputable footage of some sort, although in the age of AI that is less believable than it might have been 20 years ago. The point being that there has to be a way to show the public something irrefutable that also doesn't jeopardize national security. It also points out to perhaps a larger problem that we overclassify things in our government here in the US. There are quite literally classified documents dating back to World War One, and they're still classified. I don't understand the point of all that. But in any case, I have suspicions about what is going on here. I remember the concept from the old Ghost in the Shell anime. I was a Toonami kid back in the day. And they talked about a copy without an original. The idea in the anime was different than what I have in mind here, but it's close enough to get the point across. I think what might be happening here is that there is a multi generational game of telephone going on. Whatever the reality is, whether there really is a legacy alien reverse engineering program, or the concept was developed as a cover story for skunkworks projects in the 40s and 50s, I think that the cover story took on a life of its own within the circles involved in the projects and in the wider public. Stories upon stories built up in different segments of the heavily siloed defense program and were passed on through institutional memory and sometimes leaked to the public. This could also feed back into by pop culture portrayals of aliens, which themselves were influenced by the prior leaks cover story. And then as 80 some years passed since the late 40s and early 50s, the people who knew in the actual truth of the matter passed away, and perhaps documents were lost or destroyed or degraded, and now we're left as a copy without an original. This doesn't discount some of the very real and well documented UFO flaps, like the Washington D.C. event of the 50s or the Phoenix lights of the 90s. They are somewhat hard to discount and add to the reputable testimony from military veterans, many of which are themselves backed up by several eyewitnesses, gun scope footage, and other instrumentation. And these add to a body of evidence of sightings and tantalizing tidbits that make it hard to deny that something is happening. However, I have trouble believing some of the more outlandish claims out there, and without some serious evidence to back those things up, perhaps the whole thing leads back to the fact that there are those within our defense apparatus who are loath and terrified to admit something, and it would, and they're loath and terrified to admit it because it would cut to the core of their very function in our national security and public apparatus. The fact is, maybe they don't know what these things are themselves, and there is no way to defend against them if they do turn out to be hostile. This really brings us back to the start. We really don't have any credible scientific evidence for alien life, or NHIs to use the current parlance. Science is hard, after all, and nature keeps her secrets close to the chest. Space is big, unimaginably so. And I feel safe saying that in all the vastness of the universe, it'd be really silly to think we're the only big brain critters running around. Seems like the building blocks of life as we know it, the amino acids and nucleic acids that allow life to form and reproduce, are relatively common. We have not found microbial life elsewhere, but if the building blocks are there, it is not unreasonable to suppose that microbes developed, and that then the same forces of natural selection that drove diversity on our planet would be at work on others. Then it is also not unreasonable to conclude that more complex life exists on other planets, and may be deep in the ocean or unseen on distant surfaces. That's a long way to say we probably live in a universe that teems with life, but we simply lack the technology to detect it for now. It could be said perhaps our idea of life is a bit too narrow and a bit too Earth biased. To that I say, what else do we have to go on? There are some allegations coming out of the UAP and NHI discussions that there could be an exotic form of life in our atmosphere that is based on plasma that coalesces around particulate matter and nucleic acids present high on the edge of the atmosphere in space. This exotic life has been used to explain some of the alleged spherical craft that are seen. Not craft at all, but balls of superheated gases that are somehow attracted to nuclear plants and other nuclear facilities and appear to portray some form of intelligence. This is something I find interesting as a concept, if nothing else, but no real proof has been offered. But I mention that to say that even if such really bizarre life forms were verified, it's still Earth based. And even if it's more on the atmosphere or edge of space than on the surface. But what I'm getting at is that if it's here, it wouldn't be unreasonable to conclude it might be elsewhere. So using our own planet as a lab to try to understand life is also pretty reasonable, since we only have a sample of one to work with. Now let's ask the question, what might an intelligent alien look like? Usually for the sake of convenience, they're depicted as humanoid, since typically you're going to throw a guy in a costume and film him. However, it's probably not a terrible assumption to make. This is pure speculation and a matter of opinion, so feel free to take it as such. But we can go at the issue based on what we see on Earth to a point. For example, dolphins and other cetaceans are very intelligent. Dolphins even show limited tool use, among other things, and have complex social groups and communication. They can recognize themselves in a mirror, which is a fairly rare feat in the animal world. So, if there was a dolphin or whale analog on an ocean world, yeah, it would be fair to say that the planet is inhabited with intelligent life. I would go further to say that a planet home to something on the level of corvids, your crows and ravens, or primates would also count, because they're also very intelligent, can use tools, and many of them can pass the mirror test. But that's being a bit pedantic, intentionally so. Uh, Usually, when people say intelligent life, they mean human like. I want to distinguish between aquatic intelligence and terrestrial intelligence, though. Among all the intelligent creatures on our planet, only one evolutionary line developed true technology that led to an industrial society capable of space travel and a signature that possibly could be seen elsewhere in the universe, let alone being able to conceive of such a thing. And that line was terrestrial in nature. There's one very simple reason why that I think is incredibly important. Fire is possible on land, not underwater. The importance of the discovery and management of fire cannot be overstated. Without fire, most of the technology humans have developed would not be possible. It is even possible the development of our intelligence itself was tied to being able to harness fire, because it led to better nutrition, bigger brains, and ways to ward off predators that allowed communities to grow and thrive. Fire allows for metallurgy, chemistry, and so many of the technologies we take for granted. Fire is so significant that myths about how fire was a gift from the gods or stolen from them are common throughout world's mythologies. Prometheus comes to mind, who gave humans fire and suffered Zeus's wrath because of it. With that, it isn't unreasonable to say that conditions might need to be similar on other planets for a human like intelligence to evolve, which would likely involve a similar body plan. At the very least, there would need to be the ability to manipulate tools and fire, so there would need to be forelimbs able to do so. Whatever forelimbs might, whatever form such forelimbs might take, trunks or tentacles are adept at manipulation, for example. But it wouldn't be too unreasonable to speculate that for an intelligence similar to ours to evolve, they might fall into a pretty similar body plan. I picked a picture of Neanderthal since they represent another evolution of human intelligence on our planet, which contrary to popular belief, is pretty much on par with our own. And it's a good example, even if they are from the same evolutionary lineage as we are. Uh, so this wouldn't preclude them from maybe moving under the ocean or underground once their technology was sufficiently advanced, and if environmental conditions push them to do so. But for a technological civilization similar to ours to develop underwater just doesn't seem possible to me. The fire problem is part of it, but it's also just the fact that doing chemistry is really hard underwater since, well, the water would interfere with the reactions, or your chemicals would be diffused by the water. And there's probably other things, but to me that seems most pertinent. But hey, who knows? This is one internet blockhead's opinion. But it's my opinion based on what I know of science for what it's worth. In the end, we truly don't know right now. I'm optimistic that we will have an answer in my lifetime. I have about 50 or 60 years left on this rock if I'm lucky, and I can't imagine what technologies may develop or what revelations may come out in the meantime. Maybe I'm totally wrong and interdimensional plasma aliens are real, and all the more out there things I've read on the topic are true. Hey, it's possible, but I won't believe it until there's some pretty substantial evidence. That seems to be sorely lacking right now. Till then, the question remains open. But what do you think? I'm really interested to know your opinions on this matter. If there's anything you'd like me to cover next, let me know. I'll be posting here weekly. This is a special Friday post. Any kind of supplementary materials will go up on Fridays, but my regular posts will be continue to be Wednesdays at 9:15 a.m. Until next time, hey, thanks so much for watching, and I really appreciate 100 of you or more now by this point subbing. I really appreciate it. And thanks so much for watching.